Now we're going to talk about a progressive approach to integrations in Stemmons. Integrations is one of the most important parts of a basic setup, but it's also one of the areas that we can run into trouble if we're not careful. If you're using Stemmons, it's typically in concert with other systems that have data in your organization. What we want to do is create single points of integration to those things, and ultimately we'll have wonderful integrations that are very stable and make sense for everybody, but we have to think about how to get there. So first of all, we have to define the systems of record. Then we need to define the integrations that we want to do. We're going to figure out the key systems, find the critical fields, and later find out who's the data steward for that and implement some data governance, but that's not really the focus of this conversation. When we do this, we have a number of considerations. The first is direction. In this conversation, we're really going to be talking about information moving into Stemmons. There's another version of this where we talk about information from Stemmons, but that's not really the focus here. The next is the information type. Are we going to have just a list, associated metadata, calculated values? These become increasingly complicated, culminating with calls to action that are typically through an API. Then we think about the data source. We're going directly to the system of record, or do we want to make a copy of it to not impact the performance of the underlying system? The integration method is also a bunch of options. One thing we could do is put a SQL trigger in the database, but that's not really a great idea, and we really try to avoid it. We could do a full query that grabs everything, or we could do some custom query stuff that only captures changes, or we could use an API if it's available to easily integrate with the third-party system. In some scenarios, we may still want to go to an import or export, but that requires manual intervention, so it's not really a great long-term solution. Once we get to Stemmons, we need to think about what to do with it. Are we going to make it an external data source, which could be a simple or a complex list? Or do we want to go all the way to external entities, which is a little more complicated but much more robust? The best practice here is to do this in a progressive way. We start with basic list data, then we add associated metadata, then we go into related entities, calculated values, and finally calls to action. If we take this approach, we build on a series of incremental successes, and it typically gets us where we need to go in a much better, safer, more effective way. And that is progressive integration.